To a real live job, aren't we?
Yes, we are, Daryl. This is a situation that installers come across very often. This is an office where somebody has moved out. There's a new tenant coming in, and the new tenant wants to have a gigabit network up and running. And he's been told by the landlord that there's some wires here.
Yeah.
All right. The landlord has no idea what the capability of the system is, and so an installer, a cable installer, now has the job of upgrading this network. Now, some of these cables, you know, it's basically a mismatch. You know, you can see that there's lots of different color cables over there. Some of them are a Cat 5, some are 5E, some are even coax. And you can see that there's a little bit of legacy here. This is a 10 megahertz hub there.
Now, why would somebody leave a perfectly good hub behind this?
It's 10 meg. It's probably pretty much useless.
So just kind of up there for show right now. And then, how about all these cables? Can we tell what they are? Or?
Well, some of these cables are labeled and some of them aren't. Some of them are labeled as being Cat 5, which may or may not be able to carry a 10 megahertz, a gigahertz network. Mm-hmm. Depending on the length. If they're really short runs, they may be able to carry a gigabit network very well. But if they're longer, then there may be problems.
You know, this is a real exciting job because here a new client moves into the building. The most important thing to any business these days is to get their communication infrastructure up and running. And we're right here, aren't we? This is where it's going to be. So we have to figure out whether these cables can support a gigabit network. If it doesn't, shoot, we'll pull more cables. No problem there.
Yes, but it allows us to, let's say if you're going to bid on a job, you know, you could just bid on changing all of the cables.
Right.
Or if it's a very competitive bid, you might just bid on the cables that need to be changed, and then therefore would put you in a more competitive position with the other bidders.
Sure. Now we brought along a gigabit switch here that we plugged into the corner, which is always handy because we can do a level 1 test. And then if we want to, we can drive the cable with real live data coming right out of that gigabit switch and look at the signal levels coming through the cable and say, hey, is this going to work or not, right?
All right. Well, I think that's a good idea, Daryl. So I think the first thing we should do is go to an office and plug in, and then see if that office is connected over here, which is basically the wiring closet,
okay,
or the center of communication for this office area.
Okay, I'll follow you.
And here's a typical application. We have a wire coming out of the wall. We have no idea where it goes, mm-hmm, or what it even does, for example. Now we look at the end of it here and we say, okay, this is an RJ45 connector, and this looks like it ought to work with a network.
Sure.
But we don't really know
right
yet. We don't really know what it is. So let's plug it in and see what we got. I'm going to turn on our certifier. Okay. Now it asks us if we want to test cables, network ports, or look at the printer memory. So let's test cables. And we want to real world certify this cable. See what we have. It tells us uncoil the cable. Well, that's pretty much uncoiled. And is it a patch cable? Yes, it is. This is a patch cable. If there's any question, you can just look at a magnifying glass, look at the end to see if it's a solid wire or stranded wire.
Oh, so stranded's patched and solid is solid.
Right. This is a patch cable. And now we went through and we did the split pair testing, next testing, which is crosstalk on the near end, then crosstalk on the far end. We checked for shorts and opens, and now we're doing speed testing of each pair. Now that that's completed, it tells us that the tracer tones are on, and that we should find the far end of the cable to complete the test.
Okay.
So now, let's take our probe and look for the far end of the cable. Okay, here we are, a bunch of cables are coming up, coming out of the wall, and hopefully each of them goes to an office, or they may go downstairs into the other parts of the building. So now we're going to look for that tone. There it is.
Sure enough.
Okay, so now we've located the cable. We now see that this light has come on, which means that the test is complete, and it also tells us it's a straight through cable.
Okay.
Mention that the probe does more than just help you locate the end of the cable. If two people are doing the installation, the tone coming on indicates to the person on the probe end to plug in the probe. And then the red light coming on indicates to that person it's time to unplug the probe. So if you are lacking a pair of walkie-talkies, no problem. Alright, now that the test is complete, we can unplug this probe and go back to the office to
Right,
finish
now
up.
I'm just going to keep this probe out here because we're going to use this again. I know that. So we're going to keep that one kind of separate.
We can, now we know the test is complete,
Oh yeah, just plug it in.
we can just plug it right in.
Just start preparing for level 2, right?
Right.
Okay.
At the main unit, and it tells us we have a 5E cable, just a little bit above 5E.
Before you push the button, I'd just like to point out that this is the conclusion screen for level 1 testing.
That's correct.
So we haven't done any level 2 yet. Even though we plugged in that gigabit switch, we're simply looking at the final screen of the level 1 telling us the cable is passed and giving us the cable category.
And it says that this is barely a 5E. Alright, and now we go down, and now we're going to review the readings, see what we have here. Okay, again, it just shows us that screen. Now it tells us that this cable is capable of carrying a gig.
So there we go.
So we don't have to
We
replace
don't have
it.
to replace this one.
It tells us the cable is 66 feet long. And it tells us the delay, in other words, it takes time for the data to go from this end of the cable to the other, is only 100 nanoseconds. And the skew between pairs is only 1 nanosecond.
Right.
So it's a pretty good cable. It tells us that the delay is okay, it's in spec. The Q is in spec. The near end crosstalk is okay. The far end crosstalk is okay. There's no split pairs, and the map is good. And it's a patch cable with a tolerance of 82%.
Very good.
That's our margin. It gives us the actual pair length of each pair.
That's our wire map, right?
And it tells us the delay of each pair. And the skew of each pair. And again, back to the cable category.
Now, a lot of cable testing pullers would at this point just store this data away and they'd continue on. But we'd hooked up that gigabit switch because we were anticipating going to the next level, level 2.
That's right.
So instead of storing this away right now, we're going to continue on. Go up to menu 2.
Okay, we're going to go to menu 2. And now we're going to certify with a port. That is, we're going to certify the cable and the port together. Okay. It tells us to plug in the port, which we've already done.
Oh, and that's that reminder that says if you use a gigabit port, you can actually test this cable to a gigabit.
That's correct.
And we've done that.
So the first thing it does is it tells us the capability of the port. All right, the port is actually capable of a gigabit full duplex.
Now, a lot of people look at this screen and they go, my gosh, they thought this real-world certifier was a cable tester. This is a prime example of the network capability of the real-world certifier. We're decoding the link pulse out of that device. We're telling the user exactly what this device is capable of.
Right, but this is also features that the cable pullers are going to use too, because what happens is you pull your cable on day one, you know, and then you leave, and then the customer will call back and say, I can't get my network working, it must be your fault. The cable guy is always the first guy to be blamed for the situation.
Sure is, every time.
Every time. So this way, the cable puller, instead of having to run a sister cable or a parallel cable to the one he's already installed, first thing he can do is plug in and see what the customer's situation is.
Into the customer's actual switch, driving the cable that the customer's worried about.
And plenty of times it's going to be the a PC port isn't capable of going to a gigabit, that's the problem. Or the switch that he's plugged into is too slow and it can't go a gigabit.
Good point.
And he's not plugged into, you know, the actual switch that he thought he was plugged into.
Right.
Or the switch has been programmed to cut it off at 100 meg, you know, that kind of thing. So this allows them to troubleshoot and quickly help solve the customer's problem.
Right there, it's telling you this switch is capable of a gigabit.
All right, now let's get down and press more details. All right, and the next screen tells us, well, it went through the, I pressed the button twice, but anyway, the previous screen told us that it was auto crossover. In other words, it could be either straight through or crossover cable, and the switch would adjust. And this gives us the data levels on each of the 4 pairs. And you can see each of these 4 pairs is well above the minimum data level.
This screen is so powerful, it really bears focusing in on. That line that you were just pointing to is the data min line. Some people looking at this screen do not think that line's a real obvious line, because it's just sitting there nice and low, isn't it, the data min line? But you can see that each pair coming out of this port has more than twice the signal level necessary to transfer to gigabit.
That's right. So you know that you not only know you have a working situation, you have a situation with a lot of margin or tolerance.
So how about that, where the IT manager calls you in and says your cable's no good. You run this test here looking at his switch, and you can see that he has plenty of signal level coming through your cable.
Yeah, and the nice part about it is that it's a nice, easy to understand screen, and we're not talking in terms of the dB and things like that, which most people just don't understand. You can just look at it and say, well, gee, that's pretty far above that minimum level. That looks pretty good to me.
Sure does.
Now we go to the next screen, and we're processing the data here. And now this is a summary screen of the cable test and the actual test of the hub. We combine all that information together, and we now can show the customer how his cable is working with his switch or hub.
Right, this is the conclusion screen. That's the way I like to think about it for the level 2 test. It's triangular in shape, so it tips you off. It's different than the category conclusion test.
Right, if you look at it here, you can see that we're well above a gig. All right, and our signal levels are nice and strong, so we're in pretty good shape here. Now it goes back and asks us if we want to save the readings.
Right.
Now there's 2 reasons why we want to save the readings. One is we may want to print them out, or if it's a questionable situation, you may want to just store the reading and go over and talk to your supervisor or to the customer and say, well, gee, you know, this situation looks pretty marginal. Maybe we've got to change this cable.
Now, if you save the reading right now, let's say you were doing hundreds of offices today. You could save the reading, go back to your office, print it out.
So that was reading number 2. We saved one downstairs. So that's reading number 2. And then we just press menu and we're back at the beginning.
Now, isn't this beautiful? I mean, the first office we come to, we find out that this cable, which is labeled Cat5, is capable of supporting the customer's gigabit requirement. That's exciting.
Yes, it is. And so it also shows that this particular person did a very good job of installing the cable.
Well, let's go see what some of these other offices have in store for us. What do you say?
Sure.